On a fog-shrouded morning in November 1854, 9-year-old Jonathan Ashford walked into the village of Thornfield, England, speaking a language that had been dead for over 1,000 years. Within hours of his arrival, every pregnant woman in the village had miscarried. The church bells began ringing themselves at midnight, and the local physician documented the first case of what he could only describe as spontaneous aging, a condition that would claim 17 lives before the boy vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. But Jonathan's brief stay in Thornfield was only the beginning of a curse that would follow the Ashford bloodline for 7 generations, leaving a trail of inexplicable deaths, supernatural phenomena, and scientific impossibilities that continue to baffle researchers today. What you're about to hear challenges every principle of rational thought and medical science. This is the story of a child who spoke with the voices of the dead, aged his victims with a touch, and left behind a hereditary curse so powerful that it transformed an entire family line into something that defied the very laws of nature. This is the story of Jonathan Ashford, the boy who cursed his own bloodline, and the generations of descendants who paid the price for his impossible abilities. Before we delve into this extraordinary case that bridges the gap between documented history and the supernatural, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the world's most inexplicable mysteries. Share this video with anyone brave enough to question the boundaries between science and the impossible, and let us know in the comments what you think about the evidence we're about to present. The village of Thornfield in 1854 was a quiet agricultural community in the Yorkshire Dales, home to approximately 400 souls who lived simple lives farming the rich valley soil and tending sheep on the surrounding hills. The village had existed in relative obscurity for centuries, its only claim to historical significance being a small Norman church built in 1147 and a reputation for producing exceptionally fine wool that was prized in the markets of Leeds and Manchester. Dr. Edmund Carstairs, the village physician and a graduate of Edinburgh Medical College, had served the Thornfield community for 12 years when Jonathan Ashford appeared on that November morning. Dr. Carstairs was a methodical man who kept detailed records of every medical case he encountered, a habit that would prove invaluable in documenting the impossible events that followed the boy's arrival. According to Dr. Carstairs' journal, which was discovered in 1923 and is now housed in the archives of the Royal College of Physicians, Jonathan Ashford was found wandering the village square at dawn, dressed in clothing that appeared to be from another century. The boy's garments were made of fine materials that showed no signs of wear or weather damage, despite his claim that he had been walking for many days. What immediately struck Dr. Carstairs and the other villagers who encountered Jonathan was not his unusual appearance but the language he spoke. The boy communicated in what local scholars initially believed to be a dialect of Welsh or possibly Gaelic, but linguistic analysis by Professor Malcolm Dunmore of Oxford University would later identify the language as Old Saxon, a Germanic tongue that had not been spoken in England since the Norman conquest of 1066. The impossibility of a 9-year-old child speaking fluent Old Saxon was compounded by Jonathan's apparent ignorance of modern English. When villagers attempted to communicate with him in English, French, or Latin, the boy showed no comprehension whatsoever. Yet he demonstrated an uncanny ability to understand their intentions and emotions, responding appropriately to gestures and facial expressions even when the words meant nothing to him. Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, the village schoolmistress and wife of the local magistrate, was among the first to attempt systematic communication with the mysterious child. Mrs. Hartwell, who had studied classical languages at the York Female Academy, recognized that Jonathan's speech patterns followed grammatical structures unlike any modern European language she knew. The boy speaks with the cadence and vocabulary of ancient texts I have encountered in my classical studies, Mrs. Hartwell wrote to her sister in Leeds, yet he cannot be older than 9 or 10 years, and there is no institution in England that teaches such archaic forms of speech to children. When I showed him printed books, he examined them with the curiosity of someone who had never seen the written word, yet he speaks his ancient tongue with the fluency of a native speaker. Jonathan's knowledge extended far beyond language into areas that defied explanation for a child of his apparent age. When Reverend Thomas Blackwood, the village pastor, questioned the boy about his religious beliefs, Jonathan began reciting what appeared to be prayers or incantations in his ancient tongue. Professor Dunmore's later translations revealed these to be detailed invocations to Germanic deities that had not been worshipped in Britain for over 8 centuries. The boy's knowledge of these pre-Christian religious practices was not superficial or fragmentary, but demonstrated a deep understanding of complex theological concepts and ritualistic procedures that would have required years of intensive study by medieval scholars. Jonathan could describe elaborate ceremonies, explain the significance of various symbols and seasonal observances, and recite lengthy epic poems that glorified warrior cultures that had vanished before the rise of medieval Christianity. Dr. Carstairs' medical examination of Jonathan revealed physical anomalies that were as puzzling as his linguistic abilities. The boy's bone structure and dental development appeared consistent with his apparent age of 9 years, but his muscle tone and coordination suggested someone with far more physical experience than a child should possess. His hands bore calluses consistent with years of manual labor, and his posture and movement patterns indicated training in activities unknown in modern England. Most disturbing were Jonathan's eyes, which Dr. Carstairs described as possessing a depth of knowledge and sadness that seemed entirely incompatible with childhood. The physician noted that the boy's gaze had an unsettling quality that made adults uncomfortable, as if he were evaluating them according to criteria they could not understand. When I examined the child's pupils with my optical instrument, Dr. Carstairs recorded, I observed a peculiar phenomenon that I can only describe as depth beyond measure. It was as if I were looking not into the eyes of a child, but into windows that opened onto vast expanses of time and experience. The sensation was so disturbing that I was forced to conclude the examination prematurely. The first supernatural event associated with Jonathan's presence occurred on his second day in Thornfield. Mrs. Agnes Morrison, wife of the village blacksmith, had been experiencing a normal pregnancy and was expected to deliver her 3rd child within a month. She encountered Jonathan near the village well, while drawing water for her household, and attempted to communicate with him through gestures and simple drawings. According to Mrs. Morrison's testimony, given to Dr. Carstairs and recorded in his journal, Jonathan placed his hand gently on her swollen abdomen and spoke several words in his ancient language. His expression, she reported, was one of profound sadness, as if he regretted what was about to happen, but was powerless to prevent it. Within an hour of this encounter, Mrs. Morrison began experiencing severe abdominal pain and bleeding. Dr. Carstairs was summoned immediately, but despite his best efforts, he was unable to save the pregnancy. The miscarriage was medically inexplicable, as Mrs. Morrison had shown no signs of complications during her regular examinations, and her previous pregnancies had proceeded normally. The loss of Mrs. Morrison's child was the first indication that young Jonathan's presence might be associated with events beyond the scope of natural medicine, Dr. Carstairs wrote. However, I initially attributed the miscarriage to coincidence, as such losses, while tragic, are not uncommon even in healthy pregnancies. Dr. Carstairs' skepticism vanished over the following days, as similar incidents occurred with alarming frequency. Every pregnant woman in Thornfield who came into contact with Jonathan experienced immediate pregnancy loss, regardless of their previous health or the stage of their pregnancy. Within a week of the boy's arrival, 7 miscarriages had been documented, creating panic throughout the village. The pattern was always the same. Jonathan would encounter a pregnant woman, speak words in his ancient language while touching her abdomen, and within hours the pregnancy would end. The boy's demeanor during these encounters suggested that he was performing some kind of ritual or ceremony, but his obvious sadness indicated that the outcomes brought him no pleasure. Mrs. Elizabeth Thornbury, wife of the village's wool merchant, provided the most detailed account of these encounters. She had been carrying her first child and was particularly excited about the approaching birth when she met Jonathan in the village marketplace. "The strange boy approached me with the manner of someone fulfilling an unpleasant duty," Mrs. Thornbury testified. "He spoke to me in his foreign tongue, and though I could not understand his words, his tone suggested that he was offering condolences or expressing regret. When he placed his small hand upon my belly, I felt a sensation unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not pain, but a profound emptiness, as if something essential had been drained from my body." Mrs. Thornbury's pregnancy ended that same evening, and she was among the first villagers to suggest that Jonathan possessed supernatural abilities that posed a direct threat to their community. Her testimony was particularly credible because she was known throughout Thornfield as a rational woman who did not believe in superstitions or folklore. The supernatural phenomena associated with Jonathan's presence extended beyond his apparent ability to end pregnancies. Reverend Blackwood reported that the church bells began ringing spontaneously at midnight every night since the boy's arrival, despite the fact that the bell tower was kept locked and no one had been observed entering the church during the evening hours. The bell-ringing episodes followed a specific pattern that suggested intentional communication rather than mechanical malfunction. The bells would chime in sequences that resembled musical compositions, but the melodies were unlike any hymns or traditional songs known to the villagers. Professor Dunmore's later analysis of witness descriptions suggested that the bell sequences might have been ancient Germanic funeral dirges or ceremonial music associated with pre-Christian religious practices. Reverend Blackwood attempted to prevent the midnight bell ringing by removing the bell ropes and securing the tower with additional locks, but these measures proved ineffective. The bells continued to sound at precisely midnight, apparently moving without any physical mechanism to explain their motion. "I have witnessed the bells ringing with my own eyes," Reverend Blackwood wrote to the Bishop of York. "They swing with great force and perfect rhythm, yet no human hand touches them. The sound they produce is both beautiful and deeply unsettling, as if the church itself were mourning some great tragedy. I confess that I have begun to question whether we are dealing with a child or something far more mysterious." The most disturbing supernatural phenomenon associated with Jonathan was what Dr. Carstairs termed spontaneous aging, a medical impossibility that claimed 17 lives during the boy's brief stay in Thornfield. The condition affected adults who spent extended periods in Jonathan's presence, particularly those who attempted to care for him or study his unusual abilities. The first victim of spontaneous aging was Mrs. Mary Hodgson, a widow who had volunteered to provide temporary housing for Jonathan while the village authorities decided what to do with the mysterious child. Mrs. Hodgson was 43 years old and in excellent health when she welcomed Jonathan into her home. Within 3 days of his arrival, she had aged decades. Dr. Carstairs' daily examinations of Mrs. Hodgson documented the impossible progression of her condition. Her hair, which had been dark brown with only a few grey strands, became completely white within 24 hours. Her skin developed deep wrinkles and age spots that appeared and darkened visibly from hour to hour. Her posture became stooped, and her movements took on the careful, uncertain quality of extreme old age. "I observed Mrs. Hodgson aging before my eyes at a rate that defied every principle of human biology," Dr. Carstairs recorded. "In the space of 72 hours, she appeared to have aged 30 years or more. Her voice became weak and tremulous, her eyesight deteriorated dramatically, and her memory began to fail in ways consistent with advanced senility." Mrs. Hodgson died on the 4th day of Jonathan's stay in her home, appearing to be in her 70s, despite her actual age of 43. Dr. Carstairs' autopsy revealed that her internal organs showed signs of advanced aging consistent with her transformed appearance, but he could find no medical explanation for such rapid deterioration. Jonathan's reaction to Mrs. Hodgson's death provided disturbing insights into his understanding of his own abilities. According to witnesses, the boy showed no surprise when Mrs. Hodgson began aging rapidly, suggesting that he had expected this outcome. He spoke continuously in his ancient language during her final hours, and his words, when later translated by Professor Dunmore, proved to be detailed funeral rites and prayers for the safe passage of souls to the afterlife. The child conducted himself as if he were a priest performing last rites for a dying parishioner, Dr. Carstairs observed. His manner was solemn and respectful, but entirely lacking in the grief or shock that would be natural for a child witnessing such tragedy. It appeared that he understood exactly what was happening and accepted it as an inevitable consequence of his presence. The spontaneous aging phenomenon continued to claim victims throughout Jonathan's stay in Thornfield. Mr. William Fletcher, the village baker who had volunteered to feed the boy, aged 20 years in 5 days before dying of apparent heart failure. Miss Sarah Pemberton, The young woman who had attempted to teach Jonathan basic English, transformed from a 20-year-old beauty into an elderly woman within a week, Doctor. Carstairs noted that the aging process affected different individuals at different rates, but the pattern was always the same. Rapid physical deterioration, accompanied by cognitive decline and eventual death. The phenomenon appeared to be accelerated by direct physical contact with Jonathan, but even those who merely spent time in his presence showed signs of premature aging. The village's growing fear of Jonathan reached a breaking point when Magistrate Robert Hartwell, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell's husband, attempted to remove the boy from Thornfield by force. Magistrate Hartwell was a robust man of 45 who prided himself on his physical strength and rational approach to problem-solving. He believed that Jonathan was either a clever fraud or a victim of circumstances beyond his control, and he was determined to solve the mystery through decisive action. Magistrate Hartwell's confrontation with Jonathan took place in the village square, witnessed by dozens of frightened residents who had gathered to see their official representative deal with the supernatural threat. The magistrate approached Jonathan with the intention of physically removing him from the village, but the boy's response was unlike anything the witnesses had expected, according to multiple testimonies recorded by Dr. Carstairs. Jonathan did not resist or attempt to flee when Magistrate Hartwell reached for him. Instead, the boy spoke a single word in his ancient language and touched the magistrate's hand with his finger. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Magistrate Hartwell aged 20 years in 20 seconds. His hair turned grey, deep lines appeared around his eyes and mouth, and his posture became stooped and uncertain. But the most disturbing change was in his eyes, which took on the vacant, confused expression of advanced senility. Within minutes, the magistrate had forgotten why he had approached Jonathan and could not recognize his own wife among the crowd of witnesses. I watched my husband transform from a vigorous man in his prime into a confused elderly stranger, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell later testified. The change was so rapid and complete that I initially believed I was witnessing some form of illusion or mass hysteria, but when Robert looked at me without recognition and asked who I was, I knew that we were dealing with powers beyond human understanding. Magistrate Hartwell died that same evening, apparently of stroke brought on by the massive physiological trauma of instant aging. His death convinced the remaining villagers that Jonathan posed an existential threat to their community, and that conventional approaches to dealing with him were not only ineffective, but potentially fatal. Reverend Blackwood, despite his growing fear of the supernatural phenomena surrounding Jonathan, felt obligated to attempt a spiritual intervention. The Reverend was a learned man who had studied theology at Cambridge and considered himself well versed in both Christian doctrine and historical accounts of supernatural manifestations. He believed that Jonathan might be possessed by demonic forces and that proper religious intervention could break whatever power controlled the boy. The Reverend's attempt at exorcism took place in the village church, with several brave parishioners serving as witnesses. Reverend Blackwood had prepared extensively for the ceremony, studying ancient texts and consulting with senior church officials about appropriate procedures for dealing with suspected supernatural possession. However, when Reverend Blackwood began the traditional Latin prayers of exorcism, Jonathan responded in ways that suggested the Reverend's assumptions were incorrect. Rather than showing distress or resistance to Christian prayers, the boy listened respectfully, and then responded with what appeared to be prayers of his own in his ancient Germanic language. Professor Dunmore's later translation of witnesses' accounts revealed that Jonathan's responses were not demonic in nature, but appeared to be sincere religious observances from pre-Christian Germanic traditions. The boy was not fighting against Christian prayers, but rather participating in a parallel spiritual ceremony, according to his own ancient beliefs. The child showed no signs of demonic possession or spiritual distress, Reverend Blackwood reported to his bishop. His manner was that of a devout worshipper, participating in religious ceremonies according to his own understanding. I began to suspect that we were not dealing with possession, but rather with something far more complex and unprecedented. The exorcism ceremony ended abruptly when Jonathan placed his hand on the church's ancient stone altar and spoke what witnesses described as a lengthy prayer or incantation. As he spoke, the temperature in the church dropped dramatically, and several witnesses reported seeing their breath in the suddenly frigid air. More disturbing, The stone altar began to glow with a faint blue light that pulsed in rhythm with Jonathan's words. When Jonathan finished his prayer, the glowing stopped and the temperature returned to normal, but permanent changes had occurred within the church. The carved stone figures of saints and apostles that decorated the altar and pillars showed signs of advanced weathering, as if centuries had passed in a matter of minutes. The wooden pews had developed deep cracks and showed the grey coloration of extreme age. Most significantly, the church's ancient stone baptismal font, which had been carved in the 12th century and showed only normal wear from 6 centuries of use, had been transformed into what appeared to be a prehistoric monument, covered with symbols and inscriptions that Professor Dunmore would later identify as runic script, predating the arrival of Christianity in Britain. The church had been altered in ways that defied rational explanation, Dr. Carstairs recorded after examining the building. It was as if Jonathan's presence had caused the structure to revert to an earlier state, or perhaps to reveal hidden aspects of its history that had been concealed for centuries. The discovery of runic inscriptions in the church led to the most significant breakthrough in understanding Jonathan's origin and nature. Professor Dunmore, who had travelled to Thornfield to investigate the linguistic anomalies reported by local officials, was able to translate the newly appeared symbols and provide insights into their historical significance. The runic inscriptions told the story of a Germanic settlement that had existed in the Thornfield area centuries before the Norman conquest. According to the translated text, this settlement had been the site of an ancient temple dedicated to Germanic deities associated with death, time, and the passage between worlds. The temple had been destroyed by Christian missionaries in the 8th century, and its priests had been killed or forced to flee. The inscriptions described a specific ritual performed by the temple's high priest, a man named Jonathan, whose name bore obvious similarity to the mysterious boy. This ancient Jonathan had supposedly possessed the ability to communicate with the dead, manipulate the flow of time, and bridge the gap between the world of the living and the realm of spirits. According to the runic account, the original Jonathan had placed a curse on his bloodline before his death, ensuring that his abilities would be passed down through the generations until someone worthy could restore the ancient temple and revive the old religious practices. The curse was described as both a gift and a burden, granting supernatural powers while causing suffering to both the bearer and those around them. Professor Dunmore's translation suggested that the Jonathan who had appeared in Thornfield was not simply a child with unusual abilities, but rather the latest in a hereditary line of individuals carrying the blood and curse of the ancient Germanic priest. This would explain his fluency in Old Saxon, his knowledge of pre-Christian religious practices, and his supernatural abilities related to death and aging. The evidence suggests that we are dealing with a form of hereditary reincarnation or spiritual possession that has persisted across centuries, Professor Dunmore wrote in his official report. The boy Jonathan appears to be a vessel carrying the memories, abilities, and spiritual essence of his ancient namesake, manifesting these qualities in ways that challenge our understanding of individual identity and the persistence of consciousness across time. The professor's interpretation was supported by additional evidence discovered in Dr. Carstairs' examination of Jonathan's physical condition. The boy's body bore markings that appeared to be ritualistic scars or tattoos, though they were too faded to be clearly visible under normal circumstances. When exposed to certain lighting conditions, particularly candlelight or firelight, these markings became more apparent and revealed complex geometric patterns and symbols that matched descriptions from Germanic archaeological sites. Dr. Carstairs also noted that Jonathan's body temperature was consistently several degrees below normal, and his pulse followed rhythms that did not match typical human cardiac patterns. These physiological anomalies suggested that the boy's biological processes had been fundamentally altered by whatever supernatural forces controlled his existence. The village of Thornfield faced an impossible decision regarding Jonathan's continued presence in their community. The boy's supernatural abilities had caused multiple deaths and created widespread fear, but he was still apparently a child who required care and protection. The adults who attempted to help him invariably suffered from spontaneous aging, but abandoning him seemed morally unacceptable to the Christian villagers. The solution to this dilemma came from an unexpected source. Dr. Cornelius Ashford, a travelling scholar and antiquarian who had heard reports of the strange events in Thornfield, arrived in the village claiming to be Jonathan's grandfather and legal guardian. Dr. Ashford presented documentation showing that he was the head of the Ashford family and had been searching for his missing grandson for several months. Dr. Ashford's explanation for Jonathan's condition was that the boy was the victim of a rare hereditary disorder that affected certain members of the Ashford bloodline. According to his account, the family had been studying this condition for generations and had developed methods for managing its symptoms and protecting those around affected individuals. The Ashford family has carried this burden for centuries, Dr. Ashford explained to the assembled villagers. We understand the nature of Jonathan's condition and the dangers it poses to others. We have learned to care for those afflicted while minimizing the risk to surrounding communities. Dr. Ashford's arrival provided the village with a face-saving solution to their supernatural crisis. Rather than acknowledging that they had been harboring a boy with impossible abilities, they could accept the more rational explanation that Jonathan suffered from a rare but natural medical condition that created unusual symptoms and required specialized care. However, Dr. Carstairs remained skeptical of Dr. Ashford's medical explanation and conducted detailed interviews with the claimed grandfather about the family's supposed hereditary condition. The physician's questions revealed inconsistencies in Dr. Ashford's story and suggested that the man knew far more about supernatural phenomena than about medical science. Dr. Ashford's explanations for Jonathan's abilities relied heavily on references to ancient texts and historical precedents, rather than medical research or clinical observation, Dr. Carstairs noted. When I pressed him for specific details about the physiological mechanisms underlying the boy's condition, he invariably redirected the conversation to philosophical discussions about the nature of heredity and the persistence of ancestral traits. Dr. Carstairs' suspicions were confirmed when he observed Dr. Ashford's interactions with Jonathan. The man showed no signs of spontaneous aging, despite spending considerable time in the boy's presence, suggesting that he possessed some form of protection or immunity that was not available to other adults. More significantly, Dr. Ashford communicated with Jonathan in the boy's ancient Germanic language, demonstrating a fluency that would have required years of specialized study. Dr. Ashford's knowledge of the boy's archaic language, combined with his apparent immunity to the aging effects that had claimed so many villagers, convinced me that he was not simply a concerned grandfather, but rather someone with direct knowledge of the supernatural forces surrounding Jonathan, Dr. Carstairs recorded. I began to suspect that the Ashford family's involvement in these phenomena was far more complex than Dr. Ashford had indicated. Despite his suspicions, Dr. Carstairs recognized that Dr. Ashford's arrival offered the village its best hope for removing Jonathan without additional casualties. The physician agreed to transfer custody of the boy to his supposed grandfather, while privately maintaining detailed records of the entire incident for future investigation. Jonathan's departure from Thornfield occurred on a foggy December morning, exactly 4 weeks after his mysterious arrival. Dr. Ashford had prepared an enclosed carriage for their journey, explaining that Jonathan's condition required protection from direct sunlight and contact with strangers during travel. The boy entered the carriage willingly, but witnesses reported that he looked back at the village with an expression of profound sadness. The child's final gaze seemed to encompass not just the village of Thornfield, but the entire span of history and human experience, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell observed. It was as if he was saying goodbye not just to a place he had briefly inhabited, but to a whole world that he could observe, but never truly be part of. The carriage departed Thornfield and was never seen again in the immediate area, but reports of similar supernatural phenomena began appearing in other parts of England over the following years. Dr. Carstairs maintained correspondence with physicians and officials throughout the country, documenting cases that bore similarities to the Thornfield incidents. The pattern that emerged suggested that the Ashford family was traveling throughout England, possibly pursuing some kind of mission related to ancient religious sites or historical locations. Wherever they appeared, local populations reported unusual phenomena: spontaneous aging, midnight bell ringing, miscarriages among pregnant women, and the appearance of ancient symbols in Christian churches. Dr. Carstairs compiled these reports into a comprehensive document that he submitted to the Royal College of Physicians and the Church of England, hoping to warn other communities about the potential dangers posed by the Ashford family. However, his warnings were largely dismissed as the products of rural superstition and mass hysteria. The medical and religious authorities to whom I reported these phenomena showed little interest in investigating cases that challenged their understanding of natural law, Dr. Carstairs wrote in his final journal entry regarding the Jonathan Ashford case. I fear that the boy and his mysterious guardian will continue to spread their supernatural influence throughout England without any organized effort to understand or contain their abilities. Dr. Carstairs' prediction proved accurate. Over the following decades, reports of Ashford family appearances continued to surface throughout Britain and eventually other parts of Europe. The family seemed to be following a specific itinerary that included ancient religious sites, prehistoric monuments, and locations associated with pre-Christian Germanic settlements. The next well-documented appearance of Jonathan Ashford occurred in 1862, 8 years after his departure from Thornfield. Professor Heinrich Zimmermann of the University of Munich reported encountering a young man claiming to be Jonathan Ashford at the site of ancient Germanic ruins in Bavaria. Professor Zimmermann, who was conducting archaeological research into pre-Christian religious practices, described meeting someone who appeared to be in his late teens but possessed knowledge of ancient history that surpassed that of trained scholars. According to Professor Zimmermann's account, this older Jonathan demonstrated the same supernatural abilities that had terrorized Thornfield, but his powers had apparently grown stronger with age. He could now age victims with a glance, rather than requiring physical touch, and his presence caused rapid deterioration in ancient structures, revealing hidden chambers and forgotten inscriptions. The young man who called himself Jonathan Ashford possessed knowledge of ancient Germanic religion that could only have been acquired through direct participation in those long-vanished cultures, Professor Zimmermann reported. His ability to read and interpret runic inscriptions that had baffled scholars for decades suggested that he was not merely studying these ancient traditions, but was somehow connected to them in ways that transcended normal historical research. Professor Zimmermann's encounter with Jonathan ended abruptly when the young man performed a ritual at the Germanic ruins that caused significant portions of the ancient structure to collapse, revealing a hidden chamber containing artifacts that predated Christianity in the region by centuries. The archaeological significance of this discovery was overshadowed by the impossible circumstances of its revelation. Similar encounters were reported throughout Europe over the following years, always involving young men claiming to be members of the Ashford family and always associated with supernatural phenomena that challenged rational explanation. The family appeared to be systematically visiting ancient religious sites throughout areas that had once been inhabited by Germanic tribes, performing unknown rituals that revealed hidden historical information while leaving destruction in their wake. Dr. Margaret Pemberton, granddaughter of the Sarah Pemberton who had aged and died in Thornfield, became the first serious researcher to attempt systematic study of the Ashford family phenomenon. Dr. Pemberton, who had become a physician partly due to her family's traumatic experience with Jonathan, spent her career investigating reports of supernatural aging and related phenomena. Dr. Pemberton's research, conducted primarily in the late 19th century, established that the Ashford family curse followed specific hereditary patterns that affected certain family members in each generation. Her work identified at least 12 individuals over a span of 50 years who had demonstrated abilities similar to those exhibited by the original Jonathan, suggesting that the supernatural inheritance was passed down through multiple bloodlines rather than a single family tree. The Ashford curse appears to manifest in different family members across multiple generations, with each affected individual developing similar abilities at approximately the same age, Dr. Pemberton documented. The supernatural powers seem to emerge during late childhood or early adolescence and remain active throughout the individual's lifetime, though the specific manifestations may vary according to the person's character and circumstances. Dr. Pemberton's most significant discovery was evidence that the Ashford family maintained detailed records of their supernatural inheritance and actively worked to understand and control their abilities. She uncovered correspondence between family members that discussed training methods, protective techniques, and strategies for managing the dangerous effects of their powers on surrounding populations. These family records revealed that the Ashfords were not simply victims of an ancient curse, but had developed into a secret organization dedicated to preserving and utilizing their supernatural abilities for purposes that remained unclear to outside observers. The family appeared to be working towards some long-term goal related to restoring ancient religious practices or accessing hidden knowledge from pre-Christian European cultures. The most disturbing aspect of Dr. Pemberton's research was her discovery that the Ashford family had developed techniques for deliberately passing their curse to unrelated individuals through ritualistic procedures. This meant that the supernatural abilities were not limited to those born into the bloodline, but could be acquired by others willing to undergo the necessary transformations. Dr. Pemberton documented several cases of individuals who had joined the Ashford family through these supernatural adoption procedures and subsequently developed the characteristic abilities associated with the family curse. These adoptees came from various backgrounds, but typically shared interests in ancient history, religious studies, or occult research that had brought them into contact with existing family members. The Ashford family appears to be actively recruiting individuals who share their interests and are willing to accept the supernatural burden of their inherited abilities, Dr. Pemberton concluded. This suggests that they are working to expand their influence and capabilities beyond the limitations of natural heredity, potentially creating a growing network of individuals with dangerous supernatural powers. The 20th century brought new challenges and opportunities for tracking the Ashford family's activities. Improved communication and documentation systems made it more difficult for them to operate anonymously, but also provided more sophisticated methods for concealing their true nature and objectives. Dr. James Whitmore, a psychiatrist working with the British government during World War I, encountered several individuals claiming to be Ashford family members who had volunteered for military service. Dr. Whitmore's classified reports, declassified only in the 1980s, described soldiers who appeared to possess supernatural abilities related to aging, death, and communication with deceased individuals. According to Dr. Whitmore's documentation, these Ashford family soldiers demonstrated abilities that could be weaponized against enemy forces. They could age enemy combatants rapidly during close combat, communicate with the spirits of dead soldiers to gather intelligence, and perform rituals that apparently provided protection against conventional weapons. The individuals claiming Ashford family membership possessed abilities that, if genuine, could provide significant military advantages, Dr. Whitmore reported to his superiors. However, the psychological and social costs of utilizing such personnel may outweigh their tactical benefits, as their presence appears to have negative effects on unit morale and the mental health of surrounding soldiers. Dr. Whitmore's reports indicated that the military ultimately decided against employing Ashford family members in combat roles, partly due to the unpredictable nature of their abilities and partly due to concerns about the long-term consequences of exposing large numbers of soldiers to supernatural influences. The post-war period saw increased efforts by various governments and academic institutions to track and study the Ashford family phenomenon. The establishment of formal research programs dedicated to investigating supernatural and paranormal phenomena provided new opportunities for systematic analysis of the family's abilities and objectives. Dr. Elena Vasquez, working with a joint British-American research initiative in the 1950s, conducted the most comprehensive study of Ashford family activities to date. Her research, much of which remains classified, apparently identified active family members throughout Europe and North America, and documented their involvement in various activities related to archaeological research, religious studies, and what government officials described as activities of potential national security significance. Dr. Vasquez's public writings, published in academic journals dedicated to anthropological and psychological research, described the Ashford family as representing a unique form of cultural preservation in which ancient religious and magical practices had been maintained across centuries through supernatural means, rather than traditional cultural transmission. The Ashford family appears to function as a living repository of pre-Christian European religious knowledge that would otherwise have been lost to historical change and cultural suppression, Dr. Vasquez wrote. their supernatural abilities, rather than being random manifestations of otherworldly power, seem to be specific tools designed to preserve and transmit ancient wisdom across generational boundaries. Dr. Vasquez's research suggested that the Ashford family's ultimate objective was the restoration of ancient Germanic religious practices and the re-establishment of spiritual connections that had been severed by the spread of Christianity. Their systematic visits to ancient religious sites, their preservation of archaic languages, and their recruitment of individuals with relevant scholarly interests all supported this interpretation. However, Dr. Vasquez also documented evidence that the family's activities were not purely academic or religious in nature. She discovered connections between Ashford family members and various political movements, secret societies, and organizations dedicated to promoting nationalist or supremacist ideologies based on romanticized interpretations of ancient European cultures. The Ashford family's dedication to preserving ancient traditions appears to be intertwined with political and social objectives that may pose significant risks to modern democratic societies, Dr. Vasquez warned in her classified reports. Their supernatural abilities, combined with their organizational sophistication and ideological commitments, represent a potential threat that requires continued monitoring and analysis. The contemporary period has seen continued reports of Ashford family activities, though their operations have become increasingly sophisticated and difficult to detect. Modern Ashford family members appear to operate through legitimate academic and religious institutions, using their positions to conduct research and recruit followers, while concealing their supernatural abilities from public scrutiny. Dr. Patricia Chen, currently the leading authority on Ashford family research, has documented evidence that family members now hold positions in universities, museums, churches, and government agencies throughout the Western world. Her work suggests that the family has evolved from a collection of supernatural outcasts into an organized network capable of influencing academic research, religious discourse, and political policy. Dr. Chen's most disturbing discoveries relate to what she terms generational acceleration, a phenomenon in which Ashford family members appear to be developing their supernatural abilities at increasingly younger ages and with greater intensity than previous generations. While the original Jonathan Ashford manifested his powers at age 9, contemporary family members have been documented displaying similar abilities as early as age 5 or 6. The curse appears to be intensifying with each passing generation, Dr. Chen reports in her ongoing research. Modern Ashford family children demonstrate abilities that surpass those of their ancestors, suggesting that whatever supernatural force created the original curse continues to grow stronger over time. This acceleration poses unprecedented challenges for both the family members themselves and the communities they encounter. The phenomenon of generational acceleration has been documented through careful analysis of historical records, medical reports, and eyewitness testimonies spanning nearly 2 centuries. Each generation of Ashford family members has demonstrated progressively more powerful supernatural abilities, while also developing them at younger ages and maintaining them for longer periods. Contemporary reports describe Ashford family children who can age victims decades in seconds, communicate fluently in multiple ancient languages they have never studied, and manipulate physical matter in ways that violate fundamental laws of physics. These enhanced abilities have made it increasingly difficult for the family to operate anonymously, leading to more sophisticated methods of concealment and misdirection. Dr. Chen has identified several strategies employed by modern Ashford family members to hide their supernatural abilities while pursuing their long-term objectives. These include the use of advanced technology to create plausible explanations for impossible phenomena, the manipulation of medical and scientific records to conceal evidence of supernatural aging, and the establishment of legitimate research institutions that provide cover for their activities. The family has also developed techniques for selectively targeting victims in ways that minimize the likelihood of detection or investigation. Rather than causing obvious supernatural deaths in small communities, modern Ashford family members typically operate in large urban areas where unusual deaths can be attributed to various natural causes or criminal activities. One of the most significant developments in contemporary Ashford family activities has been their apparent success in infiltrating major academic and religious institutions. Dr. Chen's research has identified Ashford family members or adoptees holding prominent positions in universities throughout Europe and North America, where they conduct research into ancient history, archaeology, linguistics, and religious studies. These academic positions provide the family with legitimate access to ancient artifacts, historical documents, and archaeological sites that are relevant to their supernatural inheritance. They also allow family members to recruit students and colleagues who share their interests and may be suitable candidates for supernatural adoption into the family bloodline. The contemporary objectives of the Ashford family network have become increasingly ambitious and potentially threatening to global stability. Dr. Chen's analysis suggests that the family is working toward what they term the Great Restoration, a comprehensive plan to restore ancient Germanic religious practices and spiritual connections that were suppressed by the spread of Christianity. The Great Restoration appears to involve multiple phases, including the systematic recovery of ancient religious knowledge through archaeological research and supernatural revelation, the recruitment and training of sufficient personnel to implement ancient religious practices on a large scale, and the manipulation of contemporary political and social conditions to create opportunities for public restoration of pre-Christian spiritual traditions. Dr. Chen's research has identified evidence that the Ashford family believes their supernatural abilities are not random manifestations of otherworldly power, but rather specific tools provided by ancient Germanic deities to facilitate the restoration of proper spiritual relationships between humans and the natural world. This religious framework provides ideological justification for their activities while also establishing long-term objectives that extend far beyond personal power or survival. The family's contemporary activities suggest that they are actively working to prepare for a major public revelation of their existence and objectives, possibly involving the simultaneous demonstration of supernatural abilities in multiple locations to convince global populations of the reality of ancient spiritual forces. Such a revelation could have profound impacts on religious, political, and social stability throughout the Western world. However, Dr. Chen also notes that the Ashford family's supernatural inheritance appears to be creating internal pressures that may ultimately limit their effectiveness or lead to their self-destruction. The generational acceleration of supernatural abilities has resulted in family members who are increasingly powerful, but also increasingly unstable and difficult to control. Contemporary Ashford family children demonstrate supernatural abilities that exceed those of previous generations, but they also show signs of psychological instability, social maladjustment, and physical health problems that suggest their enhanced powers come at significant personal costs. The family's ability to maintain secrecy and organizational discipline may be compromised by the unpredictable behavior of these superpowered younger members. Dr. Chen's research has documented several cases of young Ashford family members who have lost control of their supernatural abilities, causing massive aging events that affected dozens of victims and attracted significant attention from law enforcement and medical authorities. These incidents suggest that the family's supernatural inheritance may be approaching levels that are incompatible with continued covert operations. The internal tensions within the contemporary Ashford family network have also been exacerbated by philosophical disagreements about the appropriate pace and methods for implementing the Great Restoration. Older family members who have spent decades building institutional influence and maintaining secrecy are often in conflict with younger members whose enhanced abilities make them impatient with gradual approaches. These generational conflicts have apparently led to the formation of splinter groups within the Ashford family network, with different factions pursuing different strategies for achieving their restoration objectives. Some groups continue to emphasize infiltration and gradual influence, while others advocate for immediate public revelation and direct confrontation with existing religious and political institutions. The contemporary study of the Ashford family phenomenon has also revealed new information about the original curse that created their supernatural inheritance. Advanced archaeological techniques and historical research have uncovered evidence about the ancient Germanic priest whose spiritual practices apparently established the supernatural bloodline that has persisted for over a millennium. Recent excavations at sites identified through Ashford family activities have revealed extensive religious complexes that suggest the original Germanic settlements were more sophisticated and influential than previously understood. These archaeological discoveries have provided new insights into the spiritual practices and beliefs that apparently continue to influence Ashford family members across the centuries. The archaeological evidence suggests that the original curse was not simply a dying priest's attempt to preserve his religious traditions, but rather part of a comprehensive spiritual system designed to maintain connections between the physical world and supernatural forces across extended periods of time. The Ashford family's supernatural abilities appear to be specific manifestations of broader spiritual principles that governed ancient Germanic religious practices. Dr. Chen's analysis of this archaeological evidence has led her to conclude that the Ashford family phenomenon represents far more than an isolated supernatural inheritance affecting a single bloodline. Instead, it appears to be part of a larger pattern of spiritual forces and religious practices that have been suppressed but not eliminated by the historical dominance of Christianity in European culture. This broader interpretation suggests that the Ashford family may be only one manifestation of ancient spiritual traditions that continue to influence contemporary events in ways that are not generally recognized or understood. Other families or groups with similar supernatural inheritances may exist but remain undetected due to more effective concealment strategies or different manifestations of ancient spiritual connections. The implications of this possibility are staggering, as it suggests that much of what modern society considers to be secular, rational, and scientific may actually be influenced by supernatural forces rooted in ancient religious traditions that predate recorded history. The Ashford family's activities may represent not an isolated anomaly, but rather a visible example of hidden spiritual influences that shape contemporary events in ways that escape conventional analysis. As Dr. Chen's research continues, she has begun to document evidence that the Ashford family network is preparing for what they consider to be the final phase of their Great Restoration project. Intelligence gathered from various sources suggests that family members believe current global conditions provide an unprecedented opportunity for revealing their existence and implementing their ancient spiritual agenda on a worldwide scale. The specific timing and methods for this revelation remain unclear, but Dr. Chen's analysis suggests that it will likely involve coordinated supernatural demonstrations in multiple locations, combined with public announcements from Ashford family members in prominent institutional positions. The goal appears to be creating undeniable evidence of supernatural forces while providing spiritual and political alternatives to existing religious and governmental systems. However, the family's confidence in public acceptance may be misplaced, as their supernatural abilities and ancient religious agenda could easily be perceived as threatening to existing religious, political, and social structures. The revelation of their existence could trigger violent conflicts, governmental crackdowns, or social upheavals that would undermine their objectives while causing massive casualties and social disruption. The case of Jonathan Ashford and his supernatural bloodline represents one of the most significant challenges to conventional understanding of reality in recorded history. Whether viewed as a genuine supernatural phenomenon or an elaborate hoax maintained across multiple generations, the Ashford family's activities have profound implications for science, religion, politics, and society. As we approach what may be the culmination of a 1,000-year-old supernatural inheritance, the questions raised by Jonathan Ashford's first appearance in Thornfield become increasingly urgent and relevant. The boy who spoke ancient languages and aged his victims with a touch has apparently spawned a global network of individuals with similar abilities working toward objectives that could fundamentally alter human civilization. The truth about the Ashford family phenomenon may soon be revealed, whether through their own actions or through continued research by investigators like Dr. Chen. When that revelation comes, humanity will be forced to confront the possibility that ancient spiritual forces continue to shape contemporary events, and that the boundaries between supernatural belief and empirical reality are far more porous than modern society has assumed. The empty rooms of Thornfield's church, still bearing the ancient runic inscriptions that appeared during Jonathan's brief visit, stand as monuments to questions that have haunted human consciousness for centuries. What forces lie beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding? What ancient knowledge has been preserved in bloodlines and traditions that predate recorded history? And what happens when those forces decide to reveal themselves to a world that has forgotten their existence? The answers to these questions may determine not only the fate of the Ashford family and their supernatural inheritance, but the future direction of human civilization itself. As Dr. Chen continues her research, and the Ashford family prepares for their great restoration, the world stands on the brink of discoveries that could either enlighten humanity about the true nature of reality, or plunge it into conflicts between ancient and modern ways of understanding existence. The boy who cursed his bloodline may have set in motion events that will ultimately reveal whether supernatural forces are real influences in human affairs, or whether the power of belief itself can create realities that transcend the limitations of conventional science and rational thought. In either case, the legacy of Jonathan Ashford continues to challenge our understanding of what is possible and what is real in a universe that may be far stranger and more mysterious than we have dared to imagine.